Snowstorm survivors, a mother dog and her puppies fight for hope. A freezing mother dog scratches at a cafe door, her puppies shivering in the storm. But what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. The blizzard had swallowed the town whole. Wind howled through the empty streets, carrying ice and snow in fierce, unrelenting waves. Street lamps flickered, their light barely piercing the swirling white abyss. Shops were locked, homes sealed, and no sign of life stirred in the frozen world. Through the blinding snow, a frail figure stumbled forward, a mother dog. Her fur was coated in ice, her paws raw from the relentless cold. Each step felt like walking on knives, but she couldn't stop. Behind her, 3 tiny puppies struggled to follow, their fragile bodies trembling violently. She paused, panting, lifting her head against the storm. The world around her was vast, white, and merciless. There was no shelter, no warmth, no safety. Only the biting wind and the heavy snow that threatened to bury them alive. She had to keep going. The mother dog turned, nudging her puppies forward. Their little legs wobbled, their tiny paws sinking into the deep snow. One stumbled and let out a weak cry. Her heart ached, but she had no time to comfort them. She curled her body around them for a brief moment, shielding them from the wind. Her own body trembled, but she couldn't let them see her weakness. She was their protector, their only hope. Her instincts screamed. She had to find shelter, warmth, anything to keep them alive. But where? The streets were silent, the buildings shut. She had wandered these alleys before, scavenging for food scraps. But tonight, the town was a ghostly graveyard. Her ears twitched. Was there anywhere left to go? She forced herself to stand. Every muscle in her body burned from exhaustion. The frost had settled deep into her bones, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. The puppies whimpered, their tiny bodies curling into the snow, too weak to move. So a sharp pang of fear hit her. If they stopped now, they wouldn't make it through the night. With a soft whine, she nuzzled them, urging them to rise. One by one, they struggled to their feet, their small bodies shivering violently. She pressed forward step by step, dragging her weary frame through the storm. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't. Then, through the suffocating whiteness, she saw it. A faint glow flickered in the distance. Warm, golden light spilled from a building, fighting against the storm. A sign swung above the entrance, nearly buried in snow, a tea café. The scent of something warm drifted in the air, faint but real. Inside there would be heat, shelter, food, safety. She stopped, her frozen body yearning for the warmth just beyond that door. Her puppies huddled against her, their tiny eyes reflecting the same desperate hope. This was their chance. With the last of her strength, she stepped toward the café and raised a trembling paw. Scratch. The door didn't move. She tried again. A weak, broken sound escaped her throat, a bark barely audible over the storm. Her puppies whimpered behind her, curling into the small mound of snow that had formed against the café's entrance. Inside, laughter and muffled conversations echoed through the walls. There were people in there, warm, safe people. Would they listen? She scratched again, harder. Still no answer. Inside the café, the warmth was comforting, the air thick with the rich aroma of tea and fresh bread. A group of customers chatted, their voices rising and falling over the sound of a crackling fireplace. Near the counter, the café owner wiped his hands on a cloth, glancing toward the window. The snow piled high outside, the wind rattling against the glass. A man near the door hesitated, setting his teacup down. "Did you hear that?" he asked. The others barely looked up. "It's probably the wind," someone replied. But the man frowned. For a brief moment he thought he had seen something, a shadow outside the door. Outside, the mother dog stood motionless. She could barely hold herself up anymore. Her body screamed at her to move, to keep searching. But her puppies, they couldn't take another step. If she left now, there was no telling if they'd survive the night. She turned back toward the door. One last attempt, one last plea. She let out a soft, broken whine. And then she collapsed. The Blizzard raged on, snow piling against the cafe's entrance. The mother dog's breathing slowed, her frozen body curled around her puppies. Inside, the man near the door shifted uneasily. That noise, it wasn't the wind. Something was out. There. Finally he stood and walked toward the entrance. His fingers curled around the handle. With a deep breath he opened the door. A gust of wind blasted into the cafe, carrying a wave of snow inside. And there, lying motionless in the freezing night, was the mother dog. Her puppies pressed tightly. Against her, their tiny bodies barely moving. The man's breath caught in his throat. "God," he whispered. The cafe owner rushed forward, eyes widening. The warmth of the cafe met the brutal cold of the outside world in a silent battle. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, the mother dog stirred, her eyes barely open. She looked up at them, pleading. A decision had to be made. Would they turn? Away or save them? The storm howled louder, the snow threatening to bury them forever. The clock was ticking. The storm outside was relentless, hurling snow against the cafe windows. The warm glow inside contrasted harshly with the brutal cold beyond the glass. Inside, a young man named Daniel sat near the door, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Through the fogged-up window, his eyes caught sight of a frail figure barely visible in the swirling snow. A mother dog stood there, her body hunched over two shivering puppies. Her fur was soaked, clumps of ice clinging to her legs. She lifted her head slightly, her dark, weary eyes locking onto the cafe door. Daniel's grip on his cup tightened. His heart ached at the sight of her, but doubt crept into his mind. Was it his place to help? Would the cafe even allow it? He glanced around at the other customers. Nobody else seemed to notice, or perhaps they chose not to. Outside, the mother dog took a weak step forward, her body trembling. The wind howled around her, but her gaze remained fixed on the door, silently pleading for mercy. A faint whimper reached Daniel's ears. He looked back outside. One of the puppies, no larger than his palm, let out a weak cry before collapsing onto the icy ground. The mother dog panicked, nudging her pup frantically with her nose. It barely moved. The second puppy curled against its sibling, as if trying to share the last bit of warmth left in its tiny body. Daniel swallowed hard. He had seen stray dogs before, but never like this, never so close to death. The mother nudged her pup once more, then lifted her head. Her eyes met Daniel's again, filled with desperation. He turned away, his mind racing. If he stood up, if he went outside, what then? Would the cafe owner allow the dogs in? Could he even help them? The weight of indecision pressed against his chest, but the puppy's cries rang in his ears. The cafe was a world of its own, untouched by the suffering outside. Laughter and chatter filled the space. A group of students debated over their assignments. A man in a suit scrolled through his phone. The scent of fresh pastries mixed with the warmth of brewing tea. Behind the counter, the cafe owner, an older woman named Helen, wiped down a tray. Her eyes briefly flicked toward the window, noticing Daniel's troubled expression. "Are you all right there, kid?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel hesitated. "There's a dog outside, with puppies," he murmured, unsure if he should say more. Helen sighed. "Strays, huh? There are a lot of them in this weather." Daniel looked at her, hoping for some hint of kindness. "They're freezing out there." Helen's hands stilled, but she didn't respond. Outside, the mother dog moved closer. She reached the door and lifted a trembling paw, scraping weakly against the wood. Scratch, scratch. Inside, a few heads turned. One woman frowned but quickly looked away. A man near the counter shook his head. "Poor thing," someone mumbled. But no one moved. The mother dog tried again, her nails barely making a sound against the storm's roar. Her body swayed. The puppies whimpered against her, barely clinging to warmth. Helen exhaled deeply, rubbing her temple. "If I let one in, more will come," she muttered. Daniel looked at her, his chest tightening. "But they won't survive out there." Helen didn't respond. A man at the counter scoffed. "If we start letting in every stray, we'll be running a shelter, not a cafe." A woman in a green coat shook her head. "It's just a dog. Nature is cruel. It happens." Daniel's jaw clenched. They're dying. Another voice chimed in, an elderly woman near the window. Back in my day, we helped animals, not turned them away. The cafe buzzed with murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, others shrugged. Helen wiped her hands on a rag, visibly torn. She glanced at the door again. The wind had picked up, and the mother dog was now struggling to stay on her feet. Helen's fingers tightened around the rag. Memories surfaced of a time when she had been cold and hungry, when someone had taken her in without question. She let out a slow breath, looking at the mother dog again. This wasn't just a stray. This was a mother, fighting with everything she had to save her babies. But would the customers understand? Would they complain? Would it hurt business? Her heart wavered between logic and compassion. Then she made a choice. A powerful gust of wind slammed against the door. Snow piled higher. The mother dog let out a low whimper, then collapsed onto her side. The puppies were no longer crying. They were barely moving. Daniel's breath hitched. "That's it," he muttered, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Helen turned to him. "I can't just sit here," he said, his voice shaking. "I have to help them." Something in Helen's face softened. Outside, the storm howled louder. Inside, a decision had been made. Helen rushed to the door. The moment she pulled it open, a blast of icy wind tore through the cafe. Gasps filled the room. She knelt down, her hands shaking as she touched the mother dog's body. Cold, too cold. The puppies barely stirred. One was completely limp. Regret crashed over Helen like a wave. Had she waited too long? Had their kindness come too late? Daniel crouched beside her, his heart pounding. "We need to warm them up now." Helen nodded, swallowing hard. "Get blankets, hot water bottles, whatever we have." The cafe, once filled with indifference, now stirred with urgency. People moved, chairs scraped. Hands reached for coats and scarves. For the first time that night, the warmth of the cafe extended beyond its walls. But was it enough? Would this desperate mother and her puppies survive? The answer lay in the minutes to come. And every second counted. The cafe door swung open with a loud creak, letting a rush of warm air spill into the icy street. Snowflakes swirled inside for a brief moment before being chased away by the inviting heat. The mother dog lifted her head, her frail body trembling. Her fur was damp with melting snow, her ribs visible beneath her thin coat. Her weary eyes, clouded with exhaustion, flickered between fear and hope. Inside, the kind stranger stepped forward, hand outstretched, their expression filled with urgency. "Come on," they murmured. "You're safe now." For a long second, the mother dog hesitated, her instincts warring inside her. She had spent too long surviving on her own. Could she trust these humans? The wind howled, biting through her. Thin fur. Her puppies were growing weaker. She had no choice. With a shaky step, she tried to move but collapsed. A gasp echoed through the cafe. Without hesitation, a customer rushed forward, scooping up one of the tiny, shivering puppies. It barely stirred in their hands, its frail body icy to the touch. Another person carefully picked up the second puppy, whose breathing was so shallow it was almost imperceptible. "They're freezing," someone whispered, their voice filled with alarm. Inside, the cafe fell silent. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, everything had ceased. All eyes were fixed on the fragile lives being carried inside. The mother dog let out a feeble whimper as she watched her babies being taken away. The cafe owner crouched near the doorway, extending a hand toward the exhausted mother. "Come inside," they urged softly. "They need you." But the mother dog hesitated, her body tensed. Her entire life had been a lesson in survival. Trusting humans had never ended well. She lowered her head, sniffing the unfamiliar warmth seeping from inside. Her ears twitched as muffled voices murmured around her, some hesitant, some encouraging. Then her puppies let out the faintest cries. Something inside her broke. With unsteady legs, she pushed herself forward, staggering past the threshold, and into the warmth. A thick blanket was already spread out near the counter, where the puppies lay curled together, barely moving. A soft towel wrapped around them, the heat slowly sinking into their frozen bodies. The mother dog stumbled toward them, sniffing frantically, licking their tiny faces, urging them to wake up. A woman knelt beside them, reaching out carefully. The mother dog flinched, but didn't growl. "You're okay," the woman whispered. "You're safe now." For the first time in what felt like forever, the mother dog didn't feel cold. She felt something even stranger, kindness. But then, a sharp intake of breath. One of the puppies had stopped moving. Its tiny chest barely rose, its small body still against the blanket. "No," the kind stranger gasped, scooping up the lifeless pup. "Come on, little one, stay with us." Panic spread through the room. The mother dog whined, nudging her baby desperately. "Do something," someone pleaded. The cafe owner's hands trembled as they knelt beside them. "We need warmth, fast." Rush of movement erupted. One customer dashed to grab another blanket. Another ran to get a heating pad. A young barista hurried over with a cup of warm water, their hands shaking. Maybe this will help. The cafe, once filled with hesitation, was now a flurry of action. Even those who had doubted, who had said, "It's just a stray," were now working together, trying to save a life. The kind stranger cradled the tiny puppy against their chest, rubbing its frail body, whispering words of encouragement. The mother dog whimpered, her eyes locked onto her pup, desperate, pleading. "Come on, little one." A long, tense silence, and then a tiny, shaky breath. The puppy twitched. A stunned gasp rippled through the cafe. "It's breathing," someone cried out. Relief crashed over them like a wave. The mother dog licked her baby feverishly, nudging it closer to her warmth. The cafe owner exhaled, pressing a hand over their chest. They had almost waited too long. But now there was hope. The storm still raged outside, but inside that small cafe, something had changed. Not just for the mother dog, not just for the puppies, but for every single person in that room, because tonight kindness had won. A hush fell over the cafe. All eyes remained locked on the fragile puppy, its tiny chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Then, ever so slightly, it stirred. A weak, sleepy whimper escaped its mouth. The cafe owner let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Their hands trembled as they wiped away an unexpected tear. "They made it," someone whispered, voice thick with emotion. A customer pressed a hand to their heart. "It's a miracle." The other puppy wriggled, stretching its tiny paws before nuzzling closer to its sibling. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. They had fought so hard for this moment. And against all odds, these little lives had been saved. The mother dog, still weak, inched closer to her puppies. She sniffed them gently, nudging each one as if counting them, making sure they were still hers. Then she licked them, soft, careful strokes, a mother's reassurance. A warmth settled over the room, something unspoken yet deeply felt. She lifted her head and looked at the humans surrounding her. Her eyes, once clouded with exhaustion and fear, held something new, something rare. Trust. The cafe owner knelt beside her, their voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe now." The mother dog didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out a slow, contented sigh and rested her head beside her pups. The cafe staff gathered near the counter, whispering among themselves. "What do we do now?" a barista asked, glancing toward the dogs. "We can't just send them back into the snow," another muttered. The cafe owner leaned against the counter, rubbing their temples. They had been so focused on saving them, they hadn't thought about what came next. A regular customer, an older woman who had been watching quietly, finally spoke up. "So, who's taking them in?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken responsibility. The mother dog curled protectively around her puppies, her tail wrapping over them like a shield. She belonged to no one. But in that moment, it was clear. She was theirs now. Hours passed. The storm still raged outside, but inside the cafe, warmth and life returned. The puppies were stronger now, their tiny tails twitching in their sleep. The mother dog had stopped trembling. She no longer watched the humans with suspicion, but with quiet acceptance. Every time someone walked by, she lifted her head slightly, no longer out of fear, but curiosity. The cafe owner couldn't stop watching her. Something deep inside stirred, a feeling they couldn't quite name. Was it attachment? Was it fate? The next morning, the storm finally began to settle. Snow blanketed the streets, but the cafe was buzzing. News of the rescue had spread. Did you hear what happened at the cafe last night? A stray dog and her puppies barely survived the cold. A local journalist showed up, notebook in hand, eager to share their story. Soon donations arrived, warm blankets, bags of dog food, even small sweaters for the puppies. And then, the biggest surprise of all, adoption inquiries. People who had never set foot in the cafe before now arrived with open hearts and outstretched hands, all because one small act of kindness had started a ripple. By the end of the day, the cafe owner stood in the back room, watching the mother dog curled up by the fireplace. A soft sigh left their lips. They had spent all morning answering calls from people wanting to adopt the puppies. It would be easy, wouldn't it? Find them good homes, let them go. But as they knelt beside the mother dog, she lifted her head and looked at them. Deep brown eyes, silent, searching. It was the same look she had given them the night before, when she had chosen to step inside. When she had chosen to trust. A lump formed in the cafe owner's throat. They reached out, resting a hand on her head. "You belong here," they whispered. And somehow they knew. She understood. The storm had passed. The streets were clearing. Life in the town was returning to normal. But for the cafe owner, nothing felt the same. The mother dog now slept peacefully near the cafe's entrance, no longer curled in fear, but stretched out, completely at ease. The puppies tumbled around, their playful yips filling the cafe with life. Customers came and went, some stopping to crouch down and pet the new cafe residents. It had all started with a single moment, a decision to open a door. And now, they had a family. As the cafe owner wiped down the counter, they glanced at the mother dog, who was watching them with gentle eyes. She wasn't just a stray anymore. She wasn't just another story. She was theirs. A customer stood by the door, watching the scene unfold with a soft smile. "This cafe has a heart," they murmured before stepping outside. The cafe owner exhaled, glancing at the little family they had saved. A small act of kindness had changed everything. And as the puppies played, the mother dog rested and warmth filled the space once more. The cafe owner realized something. This was only the beginning.